Раз. Прекрасно. Ну что ж, коллеги, давайте
Well,
приступим.
colleagues, let us begin.
Добрый день.
Good day. We're happy to welcome everybody who's come here at the sunny day at Strelka, joining us, joining this discussion about regulating in digital industry. Of course, this discussion is complicated, but before we begin, let me remind you briefly one of the few key statements, the way we're going to work today. First of all, the hosts are Binary District, the international technological community that hosts different kinds of educational activities and events, courses, conferences related to newest technologies, blockchain, big data, machine learning, and on and on. In addition, of course, we have to thank Strelka as a host because there's no need to introduce Strelka here because Strelka, of course, is maybe the key institution that comes to mind when you speak about urban design, because Strelka is about human capital, it's about cities, about urban design. The head sponsor of our summer binary program is Vostok. Scalable solution consisting of two elements. The key objective of this project is to establish the structure for registration and tracking data and also make blockchain technologies simple to use in governance. This is an ambitious objective, and we're going to be talking about this too. And also, we're going to be talking to our participants of discussions. Let me introduce our participants. Those are... So, from the very end of the stage, Olga Tkachenko, the head of the Center of Legal Innovations of MTS company, Irina Sirenko, the deputy manager of Department of IT Technologies of the city of Moscow. Then, who's next? Anton Lebedev, the deputy director of the Department of the State Management of the Ministry of Economical Development of Russia. Then Sergei Grebennikov. Grebennikov or Grebennikov, what's the right way to produce your name? That was the most important thing to ask while we were preparing. So, the director of Rotsit company. And of course, Daniil Tereshchenko, thank you very much for joining us today. Dear colleagues, we're going to be discussing today the subject of different kinds of norms that regulate. First of all, disputing. We're going to be disputing in a framework of discussion. So please, of course, we are all very intelligent, very polite. We're often very shy. To add some spice to our points of view, please do not hesitate to freely express your point of view, even though there might be contradicting one another. I will gladly hand you the word. And of course, these norms that regulate. This is the notion which is very questionable in a way. The attitude towards this is very different. What kind of regulations do we need? Maybe it might be too rigid, too restrictive. So the question that I want to ask you, well, the science of norms, normative science. There's this so-called normative science of how things should be done in a perfect world. Let us approach from this angle as well, how we should regulate this complicated domain as digital, the digital. How digital should be regulated. So, dear colleagues, Sergey, I shall start with you, I guess. The question that I will ask every single one of you, and Sergey, please answer question the first. How? Again, let us approach the question broader than I probably should. More often than not, I look at the banking industry and the way this industry is regulated. It's always cat and mouse game, catch and lose game. So the government sees what banks are doing something wrong, then they close all the loopholes, so then the government closes all the loopholes, and it continues endlessly on and on. Tech industry develops very, very quickly, and of course bureaucrats are very slow with their legislation. So should we regulate this industry at all? To which degree? Maybe we should minimize regulation or create some ground rules of this game. or the approach should be radically different. So what is your opinion here? Nikolai, thank you. The situation is the following. That's just my opinion. Internet in Russia is not that old. It's really a few years old. So we believe that internet has been existing on a smartphone forever. And it's also been there in the coffee house. But as a matter of fact, internet has been on for about 20 to 15 years as a daily commodity. About 15 years ago, they firstly introduced the services that we are used to opening on a daily basis. Some of them appeared 5 years ago, or 10 years ago. So internet in Russia has been developing in a very peculiar way. Up till 2007, 2008, the state was not paying much attention to what is happening in there. They have not been paying attention to the development of internet technology. That was kind of the era of sporadic regulation of internet technologies. If something emerged as the need to regulate, they regulated. Otherwise, they didn't pay much attention. But starting with 2007 or 2008, the attention to internet has increased significantly. Dmitry Medvedev became president back then, and we all know about his dedication to high tech. And that's when they began paying attention, serious attention to internet. And starting with 2010, 2011, indeed, they really started to regulate internet in a much more rigid way. And I'm not talking now about digital economics. And further on, a more and more significant part of internet was regulated because, first of all, more and more personal data of the users is stored online. So this is our personal data that needs to be protected and preserved, and only the state is the entity that can preserve and secure and protect our private data. And of course, the belonging of proprietary rights to our personal data is of course an issue to discuss too. And starting with, I guess, 2012, this notion of digital economics was introduced. And of course, this thing is hard to regulate from different ends, because it's very hard to regulate something that is completely intangible. In addition, when we have been preparing to our discussion today, we have been trying to understand what is digital economics, because hardly anybody in this audience or among us knows what is digital economics. It is very hard to define. If Nikolai asks single one of us, what is digital economics, every single one of us will give a very specific definition. We cannot define this thing. So it's hard to regulate if you cannot even define it. Of course, I will come back to you. Of course, you cannot get rid of me with this very brief response. So you're saying that even we sitting here cannot come to any unilateral definition of what is digital economics. I actually went to one State Department when there was this big hype about digitalization of everything, and if we give the most blatant definition of what has been discussed during this meeting dedicated to digitalization, so it can be narrowed down to taking this very old machine, literally putting a label on it, digital, and then just come up to the conclusion that it's digital and end on it with it. So question to you, Anton. At the Ministry of Economic Development of Russia, do they understand what we should regulate? Is there the digital economics in Russia to regulate, or is just some chunks in specific industries? Thank you for the question. I will start with a brief introduction. You asked first, what is the volume, what do we regulate, how we should regulate. Let us highlight something to regulate, but it's hard to find one unilateral answer here. Because there's this quote, probably by Harry Truman, who was so exhausted of listening to his economic counselors, so they have been offering him several approaches. Just give me a unilateral economist. That's what he asked. Who really prefers one school. So this is the problem of digital economics. It's very similar. There is a certain weakly defined domain, weakly outlined domain, and everybody's talking about it. Intuitively, we understand what it is related to. Data transfer, cryptocurrency, cloud services. There are a few tags that we can put on this story. Government has to react. Sometimes government reacts because somebody comes to it and says, look, our neighbors are full charge developing, we're going to get behind. Someone is complaining, I invested in the cryptocurrency and I lost my money. The state should protect me, shouldn't it? Formally, currently, government's understanding of digital economics is reflected in the program. It tells about what the state understands as digital economy, what is the subject of digital economy. So this program has 5 key directions. This is the government program. First of all, norms and regulations, something that we're discussing now. IT infrastructure, that is IT security. Of course, human resources, because tech is important, but without people we cannot do anything. And of course, kind of a conventional far side, something that is research and development. Something that is in development now for the future. In May, there was the executive order by the president that will modify this program, adding a few additional blocks. So if we go to the first direction, which is norms and regulations, this is something that business is talking about, highlighting it as a real problem. Theoretically, of course, I could contemplate about this. Of course, there are some blocks that we could regulate. Some chunks are in the domain of digital economics, but they are not in the focus of Russian business. That is why we're not paying so much attention to it in terms of regulations. But the plan that has been created for this program includes so many executive orders and laws, it's hard to tell about all of them. And there is no need to do that, but there are a few blocks which are evident. And they really constitute the subject that we're discussing now. First of all, everything related to data transfer, personal data, data in the governmental networks, open data, medical data. Of course, this is common knowledge that, of course, digital economics is the economics of data. Second problem is everything related to the ID of the person in digital environment. When I see you, I understand it's you. You're sitting here, you're a physical person. I can look at you, I can touch you, but in the digital environment, there might be so many duplicates and twins of you. You register in the Vkontakte network, you register at Facebook, and then you get this digital signature, and for one domain of business relationships you cannot use it, but for the others you can use it. So this constitutes a separate block, which is called digital environment of trust, digital trust environment, where we need to clearly identify a person in a digital world and regulate so many issues related to it. And the third block, there are so many of them, but the third block is just widely known, and we should notice it because it's at the avant-garde of movement. Of course, the financial sector, everything connected to financial sector. And again, I think this is something that we can be proud of in Russia, because indeed, our financial sector is one of the most developed in the world. And regarding this issue, of course, our financial sector wants to be in the front. This is related to financial transactions and, of course, everything familiar, everything related to cryptocurrencies, some joint issues here. But, of course, regulating digital economics is the angle, the scope that has been outlined by the business in Russia, and government is somehow trying to deal with it. So let's talk about the example of regulation and real practices. But something widely known, of course, is a Telegram network, which somehow violated some governmental requirements. There were judiciary verdict, and even in spite of the judiciary verdict, it's still survived. Digital world continued to live its life. So how can we make all these laws and orders and regulations work to a certain extent? Again, coming back to the first question, can we really regulate something here? And to which extent? Look, I have been thinking, when will you say this sacred word Telegram? So it was too quick. I didn't expect you to say this, because I thought that the audience would ask. But look, there are different angles there. There is this mission to vote and embrace the law. Of course, we need to talk to experts, go through all the procedures of accommodating the law. But of course, practicing the law as a politic is of course a very different issue. As a policy, it's a very different issue, because there's legal issue and of course there's policies. And we talk about policies. There are so many issues. How will the executive organs actually read the law, including Roskomnadzor? And of course, there's a judiciary department, a Department of Justice. Do we have actually the tools to execute the policies that stem from the law? Some might not follow the law because they don't know about the law. Others have a business model which actually based on not abiding the law. So the businessman invests on hiring 20 lawyers who will just reflect all the examinations. So, of course, there's a very specific way to apply laws. Of course, you can say, why would you really accommodate the law, which is very hard to execute? But every time, let us every time look why the policies that stem from the law are not being followed. There are very different reasons. And every time we need to evaluate that. Of course, if we speak about the specific case Telegram, I would avoid to comment anything here because it's a different department of our government. And of course, I'm on the service, I cannot do this. But do not simplify the situation. It is obvious that the issue related to sharing data with police, for example, or any kind of similar organ is urgent in any country of the world. And in every country of the world, they're looking for the way to get that data without every time going to court. Because with the volume of the data that belongs to these kind of services, it's very hard. And obviously, this often might not correspond to the issues of state security. Can we turn on the yellow mic, please? By the way, coming back to Telegram, I'm not sure that it's all about policies, because again, it's not about executing on those policies, and we have been following the law and then applied law specifically to Telegram. As far as Telegram goes, I think this is the case that exposed something different. It exposed that the government and its range of available technologies is not able to operate in current technological environments. So it's not about prohibiting technology, it's about being able to use technologies in the proper way. And again, this is something that I would recommend to Russian regulatory organ Roskomnadzor to know how to use technologies, because there was a court's decision, but there was no way to execute on it. I'm not in favor of blocking or not blocking Telegram. I'm actually against of blocking anything. But still, if you have a court's decision, there also should be a way to comply with it. Another question, again, everybody's been answering, but I will specify it for you. We've been talking in that financial sector at the forefront, and that's true. I have been working with banks anywhere in the world, and believe me, Internet Bank of Bank of America is a nightmare compared to Internet Bank of any other Russian bank. And if we speak about urban environment, Moscow is the example which, as a matter of fact, in terms of digital technologies and interaction between government and the user, is a very favorable example. What is your point of view on regulation? How does the subject look at the regulation? So what should be the structure of this regulation? What should we regulate? Because the internet has been growing more or less fine without any regulation till 2010, say. So what's your position here? My position is very much simple here. It's not about what you should regulate, because there are many laws and regulations. I am in favor of upgrading those norms, because there have been many examples to regulate, attempts to regulate the law about electronic signature. So when that law was introduced, okay, they thought that it would help. So they have passed the new law confirming that there are 3 types of electronic signature. The simple one, everybody could use it. Everybody going to be using one single token. It's going to be useful and simple. But when we went to practical implementation, it turns out that this is not actually applicable. They have just describe the qualification certificate. So if I go to Treasury, I use one signature. For if I submit my taxes, I use the second signature. In private interactions with me and somebody else as a physical entity, I also have to use, I cannot just use the electronic signature at all, but the idea that we had when we introduced this law was good, but the implementation didn't work. So now we have the problem to upgrade this legislation, not to regulate anew, but to upgrade it, just correct the mistakes that we made when we have been passing this law, correct all the inconveniences that this law has introduced to citizens and businesses, and of course take into account all of those problems that we had. This as far as my attitude goes. Speaking about our approach to the subject of Moscow's region, now Moscow is one of the most developed subjects of the Russian Federation, and we are facing every day the challenge of limitations caused by legislation. Maybe even more than any other subject or any other big company in Russia, big business in Russia. Because on the one hand, we're spending money on developing our IT infrastructure, and this investment is tremendous. On the other hand, we are a public company, we're a public sector, we're a public subject, and we have even more limitations as opposed to any other entity in the country. So, of course, there are certain problems, and they're mostly connected not to the fact that we need to regulate something new, but we need to change something old, some old regulations. So, if we talk about examples here, there's a good example of a project widely known, Active Citizen Project. Moscow is hosting this resource, and Moscow gives the opportunity to citizens of Moscow to use IT system pro bono for free to discuss the issues of property of residences, of houses. So all of the owners of the residential building can come together in the framework of this platform and discuss issues. But application of this system requires actually coming together for the same people and signing all kinds of papers and reports. So you need to go through all of the circles of hell, signing all the papers before using this platform in a digital way. So this is, again, the issue of applications that stands in the way of using digital technologies. This is something that we need to change. The advantage of digital economics here is that there has been one good step. In the framework of the program of digital economics, we have introduced changes into the legislation of public-private partnership, because probably when they made this law, when they passed this law, they didn't take into account digital technologies. And of course, they did not take into account the application of investment relationships like concessions or public-private partnerships. And when we spoke about digital economics, we actually have been able to solve this issue. So this is one good thing that we did. And now large investors and integrators can lawfully participate alongside with the state in large-scale projects, and thanks to digital economics for that, to this program in particular. You have given an example about the fact that you need to go through all this hell of paperwork. There's a similar story with digital signatures. So to get the signature, you had to go to all the bureaus and go through all this bureaucratic circles of hell. Yes, it's still on. That's why I gave this example. This is the example of the situation when they have been writing this law. They dealt with this new issue, and they thought that there will be no limitation to digital signature. There will be electric signature. They have been playing with the name of it, but still turned out that there are certain limitations there, and they have not been able to actually introduce a single signature for all kinds of relationships and interactions. And of course, it also has an expiration date, which is also a limitation. We're all people. We're facing similar problems. I go to a certain bureau and I bring the copy of my passport in paper.
Да, конечно, пожалуйста. Можно я тоже электронной подписи скажу пару слов, уж если это затронули момент. Вы знаете,
which again approved by notary office. I have not been dealing with this issues when you introduced the law about digital signature. I went to high school back then, actually, but I've heard just two key ideas. First, this law was introduced in the year 2000 or 2001. This is pretty old. 2010. Oh, the new one, but there was a previous one in the year 2000, 2001. So this matter has been going on for about 20 years now. And the first law was just not working, almost not working at all. Now I hear two key versions of how these events turned out to be. So some say that back in the day, the states did not invest enough effort and competence into it. Like, for example, the government didn't want to pay for distribution of digital signatures to citizens. Again. And second thing is maybe more fundamental, more of a philosophical issue. I recall Alexei Kudrin used to say about this. It's not that he invented the idea, but he has been talking about this problem of trust. Every significant player, be it a governmental department or a ministry, lives in its particular silo, in its particular cave. So, if there's a certain area where I operate, I will just distribute digital signatures that will work in my small world. But if I get in a separate universe, in a separate silo, I have to get another signature. This is the way state departments operate. This is the way business objects operate, big business objects operate in Russia. So, these are, of course, skeletons in the closet. But this is the fundamental leverage that ruins trust. So these days, not in 2017 or 2010, there's this heated discussion of how we should change the way this confirmation centers work, how the centers that identify your personality distribute the signature, because we need to solve this matter of trust. Yeah, but this is a huge machine, some centers, you go there, you get a signature. I have my phone here, it reads my fingerprint on my face, and I trust it, although the company that provides the solution is in Palo Alto, and I cannot even send them a claim about this. So, why are we still discussing this very clumsy processes? Because there's a good opinion of service called Gosuslugi, state services, which help you to solve so many issues digitally. Why can't we just follow the same way? The objective of digital economics is, of course, to simplify things. And our program of the digital economics embraces this concept to achieve good results, because we actually changed the way Russian government works to introduce these regulations. And all of the regulations that are passed in the framework of the digital economics program, my colleagues will correct me if I'm wrong, of course, they are all passed with the participation of business community, because business community participates in writing concepts of laws, developing legislation, and not only business community, but also we as the representatives of the regions of Russia. And again, here I would criticize my colleagues, but I wouldn't, because as a matter of fact, this is an open discussion. This is a platform for open discussion. And I talked to my colleagues when I've been telling about this. I distributed documents between them, among them, and I offered them to register within the discussion groups to express their point of view on the development of legislation. But we would really love government to take our opinions into account. Yet the approach in the framework of this program is very innovative, and it assumes the way for all subjects to take part in this discussion, including subjects of the Russian Federation, regions of the Russian Federation, and business community. I hope that we'll listen to our opinions, and they keep on listening to our opinions. I'm the part of these kind of groups. Olga, I really wanted to hand you the floor now. The position of MTS, again, coming back to the first question here, connected to regulation. As a matter of fact, of course, telecoms have very specific regulation details details, including the law, the so-called law of Yarovaya. So what's your attitude to the issue of regulation? Frankly speaking, I would like first to answer the previous claim and talk about whether we should actually build this complex constructs or just embrace what the technology gives us. I think this is a very, very significant issue. This is a crossroads that where we're at now. Not to regulate, I mean not to regulate something that works. Not to over-regulate something that works. If we ask the developers, if we recall the story of how they invented the first cell phone, or how they discovered electricity, there were no rules, there were no regulations about how you invent electricity or use electricity. People have been developing this thing because industrial development required it, or they had just internal intention to do this. And their vivid mind needed this. So my approach is the following. There is no competition between technology and regulation. There is no catch and let go game here. Are there many lawyers? Please, if there are lawyers in the audience, raise your hands. So there's one respectable lawyer in the audience. I will ask a question to you, and I will answer the question right away. This is what lawyers love. This is something that lawyers love. Is there in the legal science this ground rules that describe ground notions, fundamental notions that describe anything with the terms of Roman law? Yes, there are. In the Roman law, we shall be able to find answers to what are entities in the contract, what are sides in the contract, should there be in good health and mind and sanity, and on and on. And we could apply this character while we were thinking about digital economics. So that's why the law has survived as a phenomenon, because it's universal in its application. But to continue the ideas of Irina and any other speaker, the mission of the law here is not to harm, not to inhibit the development. And after that, when we see that technologies are touching certain urgent matters, then the state should probably set the game of the rules. But I believe this should be formulated as principles and general rules, like this.
Can you maybe a little more specific describe what from the point of view of business, for example, huge telecom companies in this specific case, we can reasonably regulate? So where have we reached those thresholds where the presence of state is necessary, and where are the cases where it impedes the progress? Well, I think the identity issue on the internet and on the opportunity and availability to make any deals using digital technologies. Yes, indeed, digital signature is a universal tool, and if you have that, you need to store it in your back pocket and not give it to anybody, because this is your second ID, this is basically your bread and butter, this is what you represent. But at the same time, you also have a simplified identificator, for example, login and password. So why wouldn't you use them just the way you use them now? So why do we need to make it overly complicated if we have all the tools right now? In my mind, the state should legalize and allow on paper that, yes, these identifiers can exist and can be applied. I think that this is a very good example. Actually, we do have a draft legislation that assumes that, for example, the number of a cell phone will be one of the identifiers of some persons in some state institutions. That would be great. For example, if I just bring my cell phone, they send me a text message and I say the password that they sent me, and it is confirmed that this, yes, indeed, this is me. Yes, that's exactly the identificator number that can be one of the examples. And we believe that it is necessary to implement this within the framework of this program. Yes, and also allow me to address you with the first question. again, how legislation should look like or shouldn't look like in this sphere, and of course what position that is related to your specifics. For example, Russian Patent Office and the protection of the intellectual copyright, it is also a very hot potato. But for example, let's say I wrote an application. Where should I go, or should I go? How to protect my rights? So where can I apply for all of this? For example, on the internet, people earn more and more money. So how can I, also jump on that train? Should I register them on the internet or not? How should I behave? Well, the first thing that I probably would like to state in regards to regulation of such relationship, I also concur with the colleagues that they should be improved. But we shouldn't strive to regulate all kinds of interactions, because, of course, there's the rule of law and there's a spirit of law. And, of course, we have one of the legal aspects on the stage, so in some ways we should follow the spirit of law, not the rule of law. That's the first thing. Second thing is that technological progress is not a secret for anybody. It is making huge strides, even faster than, for example, any legal machine can develop and adopt any sort of laws or legislation. So that's why all the time the level of technological development will always be one step ahead than any legal framework. Yes, of course, legal experts should strive for, resolve any legal claims. For example, Russian Patent Office right now is trying to tackle issues that relate to the matter of what you mentioned of mobile applications. And in our professional environment, it is a very common cause, but we don't try to just revamp the entire system. We just try to accelerate the procedure of their registration, or when a person comes to us, he can apply through, for example, a website or through the website of Russian Patent Office. So we are trying to refrain from some paper trails to digital sources and remote servicing. As for, registering your copyrights on your intellectual property, then here I would like to say the most important thing is that if, for example, you discovered something or invented something or created something, you have to come and register it, regardless if you're on, for example, even if it's a piece of art, you should still come to the registration office and make a trace that this was in fact created or invented by you, because otherwise you may have some problems in the future. Because, for example, if you invented some new technology, come to Russian Patent Office and register it. All plain and simple. You're the copyright owner and you can earn a lot of money on copyright rights, especially if we mentioned neural network was developed so far as 30 years ago, but they've started to be used now because the capacity of current computers allow us to do so. So for the entire audience, I would like to say that intellectual property is actually the backbone, but, well, not entirely the backbone of digital economy, but it's one of the pillars that it will definitely support. And what else I would like to emphasize in this notion is that Russian Patent Office is very scrupulous to all applications, and we try to resolve all the issues. So if you have any problems, please visit us. Thank you. Anton, it just came to my mind. I think that was you that you made a claim that in current applications in terms of digital economy of 2024 of Russian National Plan, there was not a single clause about governmental institutions up until recently. Correct me if I'm wrong. Or they have added some sections of PPP. I just want to make some sort of conclusion for the first part of our conversation of interacting between the states, private sector, and individuals. So, in this huge package of agreements, how is it described over there? Okay, allow me to explain what I meant initially. So, look, there is a specific grid of program management, we actually established that officials shouldn't individually create any laws. So the main stakeholder and the main pioneers for laws would be the private sector. So that's why we've chosen Skolkovo Research Center that is branched into several sections. So basically industry focused. And they, on a regular basis of the Skolkovo Foundation, they gather together and they discuss some suggestions and what recommendations should make into the legislation. I can confirm that the current plan that we drafted actually consists 99% of private sector suggestions, but because then, yes, it was reviewed by the public sector, but all the recommendations and suggestions of public sector were actually denied by the private sector because, you know, they were very willy-nilly on all the requests. But after, for example, 6 months of its adaptation, we wouldn't even need this clause. But if, for example, people right now say that, yes, there is a necessity to do so, then yes, we can agree that public sector should, you know, prod something into this legislation. So yes, to answer your question, indeed, private sector was the main stakeholder in drafting this plan. Some of the elements belong to public sector, but not too much. Irina and Olga, they exchanged a glance, and probably you had some opinion on this. No. I completely agree, my colleague, because indeed several suggestions of a public sector were denied. That's true. That's true. Okay. Yeah, well, my smile is just because the day is wonderful. Sergey, so maybe we should make a final note on maybe public sector in terms of PPP. What can you say? Well, throughout our discussion, I think we haven't touched upon the main thing, is that right now, in our relation with digital economy and legislations that we're reviewing, we have an element of tearing down all the barriers for businesses that would like to call themselves digital businesses, and that's true. All colleagues can confirm that. But it seems to me that as soon as we start to enter this digital era and business really starts to change, and we have this notion of digital transformation. Moscow has been using this term a lot. So the main thing here is when we're going to enter this era, then of course we should not, well, exceed with the implementation of all digital technologies. Because yes, they simplify our life, but we shouldn't make our life primitive. And this, of course, should be our concern, because sometimes technologies that are being digital ones, sometimes they can actually impede our progress. Because these technologies have been developing, it's all very cool. We can go to a cafe, restaurant, and pay with our phone. But the services that we have now allow us not to leave our house. So we can study, we can work at home, and now we can eat at home because we have takeaway services, we have food trucks, we have delivery clubs. So how far these technologies should influence our life and make it primitive, I'm not sure. Because what's important is these technologies should help us develop. I think that people should make this choice themselves. Let's take a gander through all these technologies. First and foremost is blockchain, cryptocurrency. But for some reason we still pay with rubles or US dollars, and the blockchain has actually disappeared from all the headlines. What's the reason for that? What went wrong? No, I think nothing is going wrong in terms of blockchain. I think it's just the laws of economy. You know, business can grow, business can achieve certain stage, but now we're entering the stage of what's going to happen next. But with that in mind, all the blockchains and all the cryptocurrencies, they will develop, and I think in a year or so there will be another economic boom. Do you think that's going to be a qualitative leap? Yes, I think so, because a lot of states are actually starting to launch their cryptocurrencies or crypto something, but it hasn't reached some new high quality level. But I think that UK or Japan will actually launch their cryptocurrency, which is going to be great. That's interesting.
Антон, опять к вам вопрос.
Anton, back to you.
Первая часть.
First part of the question. Do I understand it right that, for example, in the documents and all the legislative drafts that you are developing towards our economic national plan, the issue of cryptocurrency is kind of evasive? No, not exactly so. Let me explain to you. In terms of all the events, we actually have a separate section that is related to financial technologies. And indeed, right now in the State Duma of the Russian Federation, we have 2 draft legislations, even 3, you can count them differently, that are aimed at tackling these issues. First one is the legislation on digital assets. There's also legislation on crowdfunding. And the third one that was also adopted is legislation that makes some amendments in the civic code, and we just call it Mr. Volodin and Korshininik's legislation, because they were the spearheaders of this initiative. So now we are thinking about how we should implement them, because various teams have participated in their drafting. But since this issue is quite tricky and requires lots of discussions, I believe that last 6 months of 2018, I think we will see some shape and form of this legislation to come true, because I think it's going to be a full-scale laws on regulating digital economy in these specific sectors. We will see at the end of this year. Right. So the second question is pertaining to a Russian registry office. So the technology is called redistributed registries. So we had some ideas that it can actually be used by this department, but again, the hype calmed down. Do we have any sort of progress here? Okay, I'll be honest. I don't know. Because indeed, in its time, when we discussed it for the longest time, that this story is going to be, branched out in some specific cases to be, prototyped or implemented. But I can just say that, given the fact that there are some active news, not a single case right now haven't reached a stage where we can actually present it to the public or to expert community or society. I think that the lack of positive examples is one of the problems that basically not just stalling the progress of technologies, but we don't actually understand what we regulate right now. When we will see some beautiful, successful cases, we will understand what problems they have, and sometimes they can be accelerated, improved, or some other thing. So formally speaking, the legislations that I've mentioned on fintech, they actually had this term redistributed registries. So, since this market is the easiest ones to comprehend where these registries do and where they are, that's why it is the most active one. But when we're going to see cases in other spheres, then we will be more prolific on what should be regulated. Okay, Sergey, so there was this phrase, lack of positive cases, but you just said that everything was great. So it doesn't, it doesn't add up. Can you give some actual positive cases that confirm that blockchain is doing well? Well, considering the fact that how many companies are being opened up and how many volunteers are wanting to make ICO and how many cryptocurrencies exist right now, I think this is the positive case you're looking for. People are not questioning themselves. They still continue making new companies and new ideas. We are just, prototyping them, and out of 100 projects, maybe 2 or 3 will become successful. But that's a good number. Okay, Daniel, I have a question for you. Basically, for the patent industry, it's an industry that would actually learn a thing or two from blockchain. And a deliberation on the issue of adaptation of blockchain in your department. Can you tell us, are there any results or progress here? Well, yes. At the start of 2018, we actually had a discussion on applying a redistribution registries technology in terms of intellectual property. I can say that we haven't implemented the technology itself, but we adopted its several elements. So where we, for example, register some objects and then they move on, they are transferred from one body to another. So this entire chain is being registered using this technology, but blockchain is a redistributed registry, but here it is a singular unit. It's just a centralized registry. Yeah, but the data itself is stored in this chain. This is the first thing. The second thing is we are reviewing opportunity to use this technology in two sections. First one is transfer of copyright from one body to another. That's first thing. And the second thing is some registry issues, for example, registering programs or applications, because this will allow us to shorten the time frame of their implementation, and also possibly it will facilitate the registration without even visiting the department. You can do it on a remote basis, because it will actually, reach our registry regardless of your location. But the issue of location is a discussion based, because since it's a state registry, it's still unclear whether it should be accessible to everybody or not, or maybe partially, or maybe,
Понятно.
Okay.
Do
we have any comment in regards to blockchain? Because I wanted to move along. Yeah, the only thing I wanted to say is that the blockchain is actual example where we have to give technology a breathing room and then regulate itself so that we wouldn't make some mistakes. Just monitor. Okay, Olga, I have a question towards you in regards to big data. Telecom is a business that generates lots of big data, and you, of course, should develop or could develop this business as a separate division. Have you ever had these thoughts, or practically speaking, is it possible? Do you see any obstacles, culturally speaking, to work with big data? Thank you for the question. All the discussions in regards to regulation of all the data start with the notion of big data. We have to define it. We have to understand on legislative level what that is. Throughout the discussion that we had in the last 6 months, we actually came to a conclusion that the notion of big data is not really necessary for us. We just need some guidelines that these industries can work in coherence. So here we're talking about telecom, banks, small companies, startups. They are looking at technologies of processing of big data, or yeah, I believe that this technology is quite ambitious, because we understand that this technology is really cool, because it helps us and helps each and every one of us in our daily life. So if we are going to have some basic principles in working with the data, then I don't think that we require any detailed regulation. So basically you are moving towards minimal regulation. No. We should have some framework, we should have some foundation, but next, with any innovative development, which shouldn't choke or asphyxiate the motivation to develop ourselves, because only with the help of developers, only with the help of technologies, we can move forward. Okay, Irina, I have a similar question, maybe not commercial question, because big data, business is business, but still, Moscow City also could have a big work with data, for example, medicine issues. We can talk about lots of things, but speaking from the original subjects, are there any limitations that you've encountered when working with such data? Yes, of course. As I've said, they're all the same limitations. For example, a city could actually start to implement its own infrastructure because all material things can be done on the basis of big data. It could be faster, it could be easier, but of course we have some limitations without some regulations issues. We of course can't do this because this mass of big data we can't analyze. But what can I say? You know, when regulating all of that, we should of course maintain the balance, because if we talk about some depersonalization, some personal information, that's one thing, but the information that doesn't belong to anybody but still is required, we should of course keep the personal information still private. So why have we been discussing this issue for the longest time? Because we are looking for this interests of people, but on the other hand we should be able to use these as efficient as possible, because global communities have said that we're moving forward on all issues. That's not exactly true, because we are still in search, and I think we actually reached farther away than other issues in other countries. So that's why I think that the city of Moscow is in this stage, but we're not rushing ahead because we're looking for this silver lining. Yes, I understand that. I think the only 3% of all the data is being used, but 97% is just being stored and we don't know what to do. Okay, Anton, maybe we should of course depersonify all the data that may some connection to some specific person, and then later on this data can be easily used for work. Are you agreeing or disagreeing with this? Okay, it's not that simple, because when we talk about anonymization, there are some issues as de-anonymization. There should be some technical issues that would allow us to de-anonymize this. That's one thing. Second issue, it is very characteristic for big data. For example, there is a set of some scattered data that doesn't identify you. But if you gather this data together, you get 100% match. It's an example of, for example, Netflix in the state of anticipating of where, for example, you enter, can 100% identify you. It's the same stuff with life, because when we talk about personal data, it's the information that could directly or indirectly identify you, and that's the thing with big data, because on one hand it's abstract data, but on the other hand its analytics is 100% on point. So do we agree with this, or we disagree with this? Because if we agree with this, then of course there are some sensitive issues. But what about people that are making money on these problems? Should they get all money, or maybe other people should get money from this? If we agree on that, then we should of course cut all the pieces of the pie. So on the one hand, who should get the money out of this? Who should profit from this? Because people would start asking who should have copyright law on this assets or property, because it's not that simple, this issue. Yes, I agree. It's hard to argue with this issue that big data allow you to identify you with up to 100% match using these indirect characteristics on the amount of money you spend on your location. But do you understand that this is identification only to just finding a specific person? But as for protecting personal data, we still don't know his name, we still don't know his age. We can of course apply some demographical parameters using big data, but understanding your ID number or social security number is still impossible to do so. Why should you need this? Because I can give you an example. Because we want to limit to do no harm with this technology. This is what we want to use this technology. Okay, I'll give you an example. Look. Since we are talking about fintech, right now the banks, they know you, that's true, but on the basis of your transactions, they are starting to make a profile of your personality. And they are actually starting to predict your behavior, you know, and then they would make some suggestive ads for you. For example, would you got to go on a vacation or buy a car? And this is a real life example. This is I'm talking about an anecdote from the life of a legal person from a huge company that is really struggling with this, because, for example, we have a person and he doesn't give you any information aside from his transactions, but this analytics is still making people nervous, because it looks like that somebody is picking at everything that you're doing. So should the rights of this person be protected? Can we limit the influence of bank? Because we don't know where the bank is sending this information towards. So maybe it can sell your information about the transactions. Nobody knows that. Probably in this system, if we want the business to prosper that is based on big data, maybe some sacrifices has to be made to this business. But the question is, how much of the sacrifice are you willing to do? Sergey, do you have an understanding what sort of sacrifice we should do? Yes, the problem is that, again, we're straying away towards the other direction. We started to talk about personal data and big data. And when in the framework of any discussion these terms have been mixed, we are entering cul-de-sac. Because yes, on one hand we should protect personal data and people, but when we talk about big data, we can't define who is who. We can't identify people specifically. Let's go back to big data again, because it's a more economically feasible scenario for business. So here we have two directions. One, either the state will start regulating these big data and will take everything in their hands, and there's going to be a concept of big data that is being accumulated within the country. They will belong to the state. And the other concept is that the business should work with their big data themselves. That's quite logical. We have telecom companies that work themselves and they still accumulate this data. These are either search engines or social networks, and of course they establish their business so that you can earn money. But if the state comes in and say, I'm going to take all your big data and you have you can do nothing about it, that's weird, right? So here, that's why, as Irina said, in order to find a civil lining, it's unclear, because you know, in the process of decision-making in regards to protecting personal data, I would monitor how all of this is going to be developed, because we don't have a single case of how this big data can be applied from the point of view of state position. For example, a Megaphone telecom company announced that based on big data, they will make some mobile packages, but this is very primitive from the point of view of big data technology progress. It's just a market that starts to develop. It's very early to decide on anything. Okay, very well. I ask the audience, are there any questions? Yes, thank you. But I also have some questions for our experts. So the fact that we're asking from the audience doesn't mean that it's over. Yes, please introduce yourself. Good day, my name is Kulikov Alexey. I represent big business industry, and I have two questions. First question may appear weird, but are there any measures on improving trust to digital economies for the state and the people? For example, we have several types of such packages and such measures. Some are qualified, some are non-qualified, and sometimes you can use digital signature, but sometimes there are legal people saying that you can use this signature, but the state always say that no, you shouldn't use. Or if you use it, make sure that it's qualified digital signature. That's one thing. The second thing is that we encounter is where legal parties say that, guys, don't mess with digital economy. And I'm asking why. Because the court can either accept or decline all the digital data that you've collected. Because, for example, in Moscow, you can win this court. But, for example, in Siberian region, when they don't know anything about digital economy, you can lose your appeal. Thank you, thank you. Are there anybody that can answer this?
Since we're speaking about state administration now, I will comment as well. I don't know all the details of the particular cases, but it's more the question about clarification of legislation regarding electronic signature. This is more related to Roskomnadzor and the Ministry of Digital Development of Russia. But speaking about digital signature, you know, I would admit that there's this kind of just discussion here about this legal rule. So charge for more, charge to do more, charge to do less. So you can take a signature which is more qualified or less qualified, and implies that if the signature is more qualified, you can do more with it, but it costs more. So this is something that I have been discussing in the beginning. One of the reasons why digital signature is not growing is because the stages did not invest literally money into this, did not buy the certificate of signature for the people. So this is just my idea. As far as digital paperwork, I'd say that this entire issue of digitalization of legal papers, we have a separate program here for legal procedures. I would not say that it delivers quick result, but this is a well-known issue because business has highlighted it for us. Please turn on the blue mic. I wanted to draw your attention to the fact that within this program, there's one important part, one important chapter about digital processing in courts. There are significant initiatives with the participation of state departments and bureaus. I know what your lawyers are talking about. They want to insure themselves and use the most qualified signature out of them all. And also add 6 signatures and just put it in a safe. But of course, digital economy is about agility, and to the degree to which we want to invest into this agility. I don't know if you can, but if you invest into IT infrastructure of your business, which records every transaction, you will have no problems with proving anything regarding your work. I think this is an evolution of understanding and evolution of services, including public services. Public sector here is ready to invest. Okay, then please clarify. Well, now we're having the dialogue with the Ministry of Labor of Russia about which signature should they use. So, can anybody come to Ministry of Labor and say, guys, look, you could do it like this or like that? Define, please. Select, choose. But the use of electronic signature depends on the kind of interaction in which you use it directly. So if you're speaking about the Ministry of Labor of Russian Federation, here we need to look at their relationships, the type of transaction where you use this electric signature. If you want to send a paper send some document via email to the Ministry of Labor, and you want Ministry of Labor to pass this document on, that means that that will not work, because the only type of signature that works and equal to actual physical paper is the enhanced digital signature. But there's also simple digital signature, which is your login and password or any kind of similar without encryption, similar technology without container or encryption. So simple signature is used in two instances. If this has been agreed on legally between two entities, or if it has been established by a particular legislation. So this is a kind of transaction which you want to participate in. There's particular regulation in there that assumes the kind of digital signature that has to be used there. You can use only that type of signature. If it's not there, but there's the opportunity to have a contract with a particular subject with which you want to exchange papers, documents. So if you can have a certain agreement with your opponent, then you can agree on any type of electronic signature that you would agree on, both sides would agree on. We cannot turn, of course, our discussion to legal consultancy, but there's the dilemma that I'm actually facing in my life now. So I really wanted to hear your opinion, because Labor Codex of Russia says that electrical signature can be used only in one particular case, which is working with working remote with your employees, and there are no other highlighted ways to use this kind of signature. There's law about electronic digital signature, and here's the direct question to the Ministry of Labor: can I just use electronic signature for a legal labor contract? And they tell us, you know, guys, it's not in the code. We don't care, even though there's a law. There's a second question here, then it's going to be the last question. Yeah, sure. So, is there any initiative in the government to simplify the digital compliances that there are? What am I talking about? There are two digital IDs of the person which we have to log in. That is exorbitant. So now I hear that you want to invent the third one, the phone number. So, but now we put in our tax number and our pension index, pension number, pension code, and tax code. So tax code is redundant because a person can have 3 or 4 tax codes. So, should we really reconsider this? Yeah, I am representing government here, but again, this is not my domain. But look, there's this lengthy discussion about whether there should be one single identificator for a person. We've been talking about it for 10 years. At a certain stage, we thought, let's make a single one. And, okay, it could be either your pension number or your taxation number. But we have been more inclined to the possibility to directly match these IDs in a certain matrix that would identify the person, instead of introducing one single unified ID. But let me highlight once more, this is the discussion where we have not been able to come up with the final solution. When we have been finalizing our program of digital economics, we have been discussing these words: a unified identificator, or a throughout identificator, or end-to-end identificator. So when we have been developing this national program, and it has been released, but of course, there has been executive order which ordered to develop the new program. But still, in the project, we talk about digitalization of governance. And there's a specific issue in the project that is related to universal personal ID of a citizen. So now, this is positioned as one decisive solution, operating as a single unified ID, but still it is a project, and there is no finalized decision whether we will actually write it down into legislation, and there's also no timeline. So it seems like we're living in a digital environment, and every day I'm responding to the requests and claims from citizens which are saying basically the same thing. They're threatening us, cursing us, because they're anxious, especially those people who are religious, who are at least applying to their religious beliefs. They're saying that there's number, the devil, another ID. They've read some articles saying that So this new ID is related to the number of devil, and they are applying to Bible and anything else, saying this is some blasphemous, devilish thing, asking us to stop it. So let me tell you, we should move towards unified ID, but let us take into account the specifics of our country. Yeah, of course, this is not the issue of the Ministry of Economic Development of Russia. But there were a few more questions in the audience. The person to the right there. My name is Daniel. Here's my question. You spoke that blockchain tech is used in Russian registry, but it's centralized. So what's the point there? Is it just blockchain for the sake of it to show off, or there's some actual use in it? Daniel, I think this is a question to you. Speaking about Rus registry, Rosreestr, there's nothing I can tell you about. But as far as Rus patent goes, and the use of blockchain in our department, of course, we naturally understand that using it individually is pointless. It's not blockchain by definition. So we are using similar technology when we are adding, we're changing our own registry, we're adding notes into our own registry. That's one thing. Otherwise, we completely understand that the point, the idea of distributed registry is the fact that it's distributed. So it is, it provides protection, it secures data and operations, and there's no way to add any changes to this particular registry. You understand this? And we realize that, as far as my technical knowledge goes, this should be distributed among a large number of those who store this information. And of course, we're not saying that we're going to regulate this process. So, if we will arrive to realization that certain deals and registries have to be based on blockchain, of course, we do realize that, first of all, will be widely known, and B, that this will not only stored by governmental structure, just government will be one of the subject in this law interaction, in this legal interaction. Yeah, let's continue with this idea. Imagine we do some kind of distributed registry, as you have said. Who will be other subjects, ordinary citizens, users, who? At the current stage, we have been looking, again, let's come back to the issue of intellectual property. There are a few entities that are called patent trustees who are facing this matter. There are large-scale organizations which, for example, are society of inventors or societies of this kind. And every single organization like this or every single entity like this can be a subject of this kind of legal interaction. If, of course, they intend to do this. There is a technical possibility to do that. They could participate in this kind of distributed registry. This is the way I see it. Thank you. Are there any more questions? Gradually, we're running out of time, so if there are questions, please hurry up. Yeah, please. Young man over there to the left of me. And please introduce yourself. Hi, my name is Oleg Kaldev, Bit News Today. I represent Bit News Today. So, let's go into some detail. When we immerse into this notion of digital economics, we constantly face so many contradictions in definitions of what is blockchain or what is cryptocurrency, and so on and so forth. That's when I realized that current law is just so confused with all these kinds of tech. And also it's confused about really having a certain vision over these things. So, the question is here. Does digital economics, by definition, by nature, need its particular new law specifically dedicated to it? My answer is no, it doesn't need any new law. And as far as vocabulary goes, of course, there's so much confusion there. That is why our approach to digital economics is the following. Those lawyers which write laws and regulations are constantly in touch with the business community who understand the essence of those regulations. But those lawyers who initially write the language of legislation, more often than not, know terms better than the business community, because they initially understand how to use these terms and vocabulary in general. Because, for example, this terms of authentication and identification, because everybody always confuses these two things when they're approaching writing legislation. We have been discussing a lot what is authentication and how it differs from identification, but this doesn't mean that we have to just reject everything that has been before and create something new. Actually, there are not so many mistakes in terms of vocabulary in current legislation. It's more that legislation is behind the development of technology. Can I ask a brief question too, or give a brief comment? Sorry, here, more of a philosophical comment. So there are a few layers here. First, when we're talking about transformation of fundamental sciences, of course, there's a need for this kind of transformation. There's another activity which is formally not within the program Digital Economics for Russia, but together with analytical centers, working with the government of Russia, we're working on it. The fact is that we have established a new grant program specifically dedicated to digital trend disruption to introduce the terms of transformation into legislation, so that this ship of fundamental science in Russia would be steered towards a more practical direction. And also with this grant program, we're highlighting the new horizon. So there's been an open contest there. Now we are analyzing the results, trying to steer fundamental science into writing this vocabulary for digital era. And another thing which we really must mention is that in addition to this particular gaps that we want to fill with this new plan, we also have this concept of complex legal regulation. This is the issue related to the fact that in addition to filling these gaps and dealing with urgent matters, we also need somehow conceptually understand and reconsider where Russian judiciary system goes as speaking about digital economics. This includes unification of vocabulary and similar things. Of course, everybody wants to write legislation as quickly as possible. Nobody wants to deal with concepts, because laws deal with actual current matters. But of course, we must not forget, and we do not forget, these fundamental issues. Yes, I wanted to speak about this too. Of course, we should be talking about evolution of the law, not the revolution of the law, not the replacement of the law, but evolution of the law. A good example by Anton with the Russian Foundation of Fundamental Research. This is a very important experience when fundamental science particularly looks in terms of looks towards digital economics and deals with vocabulary and issues of digital economics. And this would help us to avoid the revolution, which probably is just redundant. We don't know. Maybe the scientists will tell us where we should disrupt something in the law. Your colleagues, a quick question. I just want to add a quick question. Answer anybody who wants to answer. Do we need to define special legal territories for specific regimes for digital businesses where they would develop in a more comfortable environment? To continue, should we somehow bring up universities or some centers of digital research and development? Is there in the agenda of your program? Because this issue is widely known that universities need to also catch up with the current digital economics. Let me answer the first part of your question. speaking about integrating of the situation today. So, if we look into the situation, the legislation today, only formal constitutionalists speak about unified status of the personal ID or legal space, but in Russia there are many legal regimes that have been introduced: special economic zones, territories of advanced social economic development, industrial parks, Skolkovo Foundation, Far East Port, and less than a month ago there was another law about specific administrative areas. Honestly, the Ministry of Economic Development and me personally, we're in favor of this particular sandboxes. And we're going to move forwards with legislation for these kind of sandboxes. But this new regulation should go in line with all of the old legislation. Is it the attempt to unify this, or this is some new legal regime? How is it different from the previous ones? Because, as a matter of fact, there are so many these specific economic legal statuses. For every particular one, there is a specific federal law that describes it. So, with all of the simplicity and attractiveness of this task, it's still a significant legal challenge, because I don't think there is just an objective to pass another law saying that finally we have a legal sandbox for digital economics. No. But again, we have been discussing this administrative region for quite a long time, and they have been conflicted with current legislation for most of the territories in Russia. So only when they introduced the circumstances that really needed introduction of this kind of areas, then you have been able to come up with the understanding of what it should be. So, are there any comments about how we could, in certain industries of our lives, achieve some convergence? I speak about universities that do a lot of researches, put them together with startups in high-tech and IT, and of course, business that needs actual specialists and employees later on. We're now working with younger generation in one of our public organizations, which again deals with users, but any artificially created territories in our country do not grow. We see Far East, but around university, it's just silence. You come there, and it's just sad. Fortunately, China is not far from there, and a Chinese study there, but we have invested so much money in Innopolis there, Innovation Polis. It seems fascinating. There are roads, there are buildings, there are apartments for people to live and work, but there are no people there. And this is the key upset. This is the major letdown. So, if we want our country to grow and become a superpower again, because now we see that there are only two superpowers, USA and China, and Russia is far behind in terms of tech here. So, if we want to catch up with them, we need some very strong influx of population. We need immigration. And I don't know how we grow population in Russia up to 250 million in 10 years, because this is the only way for us to grow. And with the current structure of population and unilateral intention for everybody to move to Moscow or St. Pete, it is very hard to develop. No matter how good are the economic conditions that government creates in this or that area, this is all artificial. We have just created one in Kaliningrad, and I don't know whether that will work out. The only chance for us to be a technologically advanced state is attracting specialists, new population that will come to our country. Okay, if we torture the economist and ask him these kind of questions, one after another, in a lightning round, leading to a certain logical end, and every economist would at a certain point say that it's all about labor market, and in the end it all comes down to demographics. So everything is justified by the issue of demographics. So let us blame something on a tertiary domain. Let us wrap up with this. Thank you so much for the discussion. Thank you for your participation and questions. Thank you so much.